the inheritance, I'm going to mention something to do with inheritance. You know, that there's a famous scholar. Today they've made this inheritance thing into a big deal, right? Like, once again, in the past there was a Maliki legend. I'll inshallah in the future go through some works dedicated to his book. His name was Ibn Ardoon. Okay, and he's actually, you know, I've spoken about Imam Burzuli, the great Maliki legend who said that the capital punishments would change in his day and age. He was from like the 800s going into maybe 900s, like that. So 800 Hijri, yes. So he was in the 9th century, not going into 900, 800 Hijri. Now, so the 9th century of Hijrah. Now, this Ibn Ardoon is actually like one of his future, from his generation, from his daughter's line. So from his daughter's, I think, grandchild or something. And he is also a great faqih in Islam. A very great Maliki don. And his name is Ibn Ardoon. And I'll go through this his thing in much more detail in the future at some point. But he had an issue. He had a fatwa which he passed a ruling in his day and age to do with inheritance. It was to do with the wife. Now, you know, the wife can only inherit a certain amount. Okay, so whether she's going to get a fourth, or whether she'll get an eighth, stuff like this, depending on how many wives there are and stuff like this. So the wife would only get a certain fraction, and the children most likely would get more than the wife, and the father would inherit, and the mother would inherit, and all this kind of stuff, but the wife would get less. Okay, so whether, depending on the whole context of who's involved, but she would get, whether it's going to be an eighth, or, you know, how many there are, or a fourth, or whatever these fractions will add up to in her situation, depending on how many family members are involved and stuff. But Ibn Ardoon, in his time, passed a ruling, and he was a great Maliki legend. He said, and this ruling became known as al-Kadwa Si'aya. He said that, look, this woman who spent a great portion of her life with this man, he said that she would have helped him to achieve whatever he achieved. Even if she didn't physically help, but she would have been doing things like taking care of the kids, or in many of these cases in the past, she would have physically helped. Because even today, in the rural part of the Muslim world, women actually work in the fields. They go, they take the crops, they kind of sift through them, organize them, do all of these things. So he said that this woman, kad and si'aya means your hard work. And he said the hard work this woman has put in during her lifetime, he said that this, right, he said this is not fair. So he passed a ruling, and this ruling still exists in the Maliki madhab today. He said that the wife would inherit 50% of everything before the inheritance is even split. So she would get half, and then from the inheritance she would get her own allocated portion too. So the inheritance, then everybody can get their portion, and she can claim her portion from the inheritance. So she would get 50% of everything before there's any division of any assets or anything. Now just look at that, subhanallah. That, now, was he deemed a modernist? He was at least over 400 years ago. He's deemed a great Maliki scholar of his age. Right now, I totally agree with that. I agree with his ruling, totally. Now, what I'm trying to say is that, was he deemed, you know, people say, oh, you know, you're making these things. How are we making these things exist? These scholars looked at it and they said, in our day and age, things are different. So we need to put, so they said we need to kind of make sure things reflect our own day and age. So, okay, so that's enough of, and there has been recently as well in Tunis, they've got what they call the Diwan al-Ifta, which is their main kind of central body of giving fatwa, which last year gave the fatwa that they felt men and women boys and girls are equal in inheritance. And they are Maliki in fiqh. People criticize them because they said, oh, they did this to please the government or whatever. But they've got justifications. They've got Quranic verses and things like this, and they show, and they've passed that fatwa. The fatwa does exist, and that is now part of the law within Tunisia, which is a Maliki. It's run by Maliki principles in that sense. So, okay.